Hello and welcome to the Planter Podcast, where we talk about gardening and try to make it easier for you to grow food. I'm one of your hosts, Peter, and I garden in Connecticut, where it is very snowy.
I'm Mylan, an urban gardener here in Atlanta, Georgia.
And I'm Erin. I'm a market gardener in Huron County, Ontario, and it is also very snowy.
Yes. And that's on theme with what we're talking about today. We're talking about winter sowing methods. So, even Milan, like the whole East Coast at least, is pretty cold right now. So, I'm sure like you didn't get much snow, but you did get the cold, right?
No, I didn't get any snow. I was pretty bummed about that, but we did get some brutal cold down to like 14, 15 degrees Fahrenheit. But as growing in the Southeast goes, we're back really, really warm. So we're going to be in the 70s this week.
What I would give to have 70 degrees. You were just saying we got as cold as 15. 15.
Hmm.
Yesterday I left the house and it was 0. And then I got uh out of I came back and it was 15 degrees. 15 felt warm compared. So and Erin's just shaking her head like
I mean,
you
it's
too.
it's all cold all the time. We have had a bit of a cold front though for the last few weeks. So we've had in Celsius, I'm not sure off the top of my head in Fahrenheit, but like minus 30 wind chills. So it's been, but on Valentine's Day, we're getting to 1 degree above freezing. So I am just awaiting
Yeah.
that day.
Be nice and toasty.
Some
That's
snow
right.
might melt then. So
I hope so.
yeah. So winter sowing. This usually, when people talk about winter sowing, I think the first thing that most people think about is the milk jug method, right? At least that's what I think of, and that's what I've done in the past. So I have some props here. I'm gonna make myself full screen if I can. There we go. Okay. Or maybe I could do this. Oh, that's better. Okay. So if anyone that's listening to the audio version of the podcast, I just got a regular old milk jug and I cut three sides of it. And then you're left with just like a nice little spot to put your dirt, and you can sow seeds. And there's varying opinions on what you do with the cap. So I've seen people say leave the cap off so that you get some evaporation, so that mold and mildew doesn't grow. Um, Other people say okay, maybe if it gets too hot, um, then that cap will actually let it breathe more. It won't get too hot and bake your plants. Um, on the other hand, sometimes I think it's fine. If it's really cold outside, there's still like snow, you might be fine with the cap on. I have tried it without the cap. Um, Aaron Milan, have you done this method, and what do you think about it?
I haven't done the traditional milk jug method, although I've seen it many, many times. So I've done other types of winter sowing, mini greenhouse, heated greenhouse, caterpillar tunnels, which I mean, it's kind of arguably more season extension in a way. But I've seen really positive feedback, and I've heard other gardeners locally saying that they have really good results with the milk jugs.
I've yet to try the milk jugs either. The temperature swings in my area, I'm not sure that it's really conducive. Because on a day, like I said, this week we're going to be mid 70s. The temp
Hmm.
inside the jug would be probably over 100. So
Yeah.
I don't know that it works real well when you have the wide swings of warm weather like we have here.
Yep. Yeah, this method. So I've tried it. I thought for sure, Aaron, you might have tried this, but here in New England, it works really well because like we start cold and the days gradually get warmer, unlike you in the South island. And yeah, I just like sow a bunch of seeds. Sometimes I'll do the method where I'll just like scatter a whole bunch of seeds. So then I'll just have a whole bunch of dense seedlings that I can transplant out into the garden once it gets better for them out there. Um, you can also deliberately plant so that they're spaced further away. I've noticed that when I plant winter sowing in milk jugs, I put too many seeds in there, and then about half them just I never use, and then they just kind of wither away in the milk jug. Um, Also, so like people also, when they're doing this technique, what do you do with the open side? I know a lot of people will duct tape the entire perimeter. I like to leave one side uncut, and that gives you like a nice little hinge to work with. And then what I do is I just put one small piece of duct tape on the other side, and that keeps it secure enough. It also lets some water evaporate. I've noticed that it doesn't really harm the greenhouse effect that you're going for with winter sowing. Um, and it uses like less duct tape and stuff, so it's a little bit cheaper that way. So yeah.
Now, one tip I have seen other growers do is put a few drainage holes in the bottom. It doesn't have to be too many. Like you
Hmm.
do want to keep the moisture in, but especially if you're leaving the top open and you're getting some snow or some rain coming in the top, that can help. And then one thing I've seen is instead of using a knife, you can use like either a piece of wire that's been heated up. Some people said they use like a Dremel or even a soldering iron, but something that's a little bit safer than the knife because the knife can kind of slide around. So,
Yeah,
oh
it's a
no,
little dangerous. I was
Peter's
just
living
doing this.
dangerously.
Yeah, you could do the scissor thing where you kind of like try to stab it and then you accidentally hit your hand. So it's you got to be safe with this, try to do it safely. So yeah, don't injure yourself trying to cut open a milk jug just to do this. So,
So maybe we should talk a little bit about what kind of seeds work really well for winter sowing. So Peter, what have you tried this with?
so I always start with the cold weather crops. So I do a lot of bok choy in winter sowing, uh, green onions. Sometimes even cabbage seeds or anything in the collard family seems to do really well. I would not try tomato seeds or peppers or any of those hot plants because they require warmer germination temperatures.
Mm-hmm.
So you're just gonna like you might get them to germinate on a day when it gets really warm, and then it'll get cold again, and they're just gonna go into shock and not grow very well. So yeah. Do you have any
Yeah.
other plants you would try to winter sow with?
Well, I was just going to comment. So I have seen some people, air quotes, winter sow tomatoes and peppers, but it's not really just set it and forget it. They're doing
Hmm.
it a little later in spring, and they're constantly bringing them in and out depending on the temperature. So that
Yeah,
can work if if you don't have grow lights inside and you're looking for an alternative. At least they're getting
you got to
the
keep
the
on top of them
daylight,
for sure. Yeah,
yeah, outside, but it's then you're committed to that work of monitoring the temperatures and whenever it gets too cold, and I'm not even talking freezing, but just like let's say below 40 or so, or
hmm,
even maybe even a little warmer, you want to bring them in because they're going to get stunted, right? So it's just sort of a constant juggle. So that's a variation I've seen, but it's not true winter sowing. The other caveats is you want to pick plants that transplant well,
hmm.
because you are eventually going to be picking them out and planting them in the ground. Like they're not going to stay in the container forever, with the exception of maybe radishes, maybe. So, your squashes and those sorts of things. First of all, I'd take them off the table anyways because of the temperature, but also because of the transplantability. Same thing with carrots. Um, what else? Oh, and then for
I
me,
I forgot. Lettuce is one of my favorite things to winter sow because you get this whole thing of like a ton of lettuce seeds, and then whenever a spot opens up in your garden, you can just pluck one out and transplant it over there, and then lettuce is one of those things that you just fill holes in your garden with. It's great for maximizing the potential of your garden space.
mhm. Yeah,
Sorry, go
spinach.
ahead.
No, spinach is great for that
Yep.
too.
Hmm.
The other plant I'd exercise a little bit of caution with is bulbing onions. And the reason being, at least here with the bulbing onions, it's a little bit of a race against time to get the plant to a certain size before the day length gets long enough that it starts bulbing. So if you're winter sowing a bulbing onion, at least here it might maybe start doing things around mid-March ish, give or take. But that's not really enough time. Like right
Mhm.
now, I've already got my bulbing onions going indoors and they have warm temperatures to grow faster. So that's another caveat. It is technically a cool season crop, but you just need it to grow that little bit faster and that little bit longer to get a bulb.
So before we move on to what Mylan's going to talk about, another thing you can use for winter sowing, like takeout containers. I've been saving these from Chili's, and it's the same technique. You just different container, lets the light in, um, keeps them warm. Really, anything from your recycling bin that satisfies that criteria, go for it. It all works. All right, so Mylan, you were gonna talk about how you winter sow, but it's a little different. You're using an indoor. You're in a greenhouse, basically, right?
Right. So it's the exact same concept, but I don't have a professional greenhouse. I have one of the pop up canopy style. So it's made out of the translucent, plastic material. And I
Mm-hmm.
think, Peter, do you have the ability to put that up on screen now?
I do. Here it is.
So, okay. So yeah, in my case, I am winter sowing in a this pop up greenhouse. It's not a professional greenhouse, but it's very similar, right? So it's got the semi clear, I'm sorry, semi transparent fabric
Mm-hmm.
material, plastic material, where it still lets in a good bit of light, and it also holds a significant amount of heat during the day. So the doors zip up. There's one on the front and back, and then there are windows that I can roll up during the day. So this week, our nighttime temperatures are hovering somewhere around 40 degrees, and then our daytime temperatures are high 60s to high 70s. Now, as much as I do like using this, these weeks present quite a challenge, right? Because the internal temperature, when it's 60, 65 outside, will be 90 to 100 inside
Wow.
if I don't have adequate ventilation. So weeks like this, it's a lot of very similar to what you described, Peter, with the indoor outdoor moving the jugs. In
Mm-hmm.
this case, I have to be very mindful to make sure that I'm ventilating properly during the day, but then, keeping it closed at night.
Now,
So if you,
have you added like a thermostat to this so you can see from inside the house how
I
hot it's
do
getting
have
out
one
there?
of those wireless units that has a sensor that I keep in the greenhouse. I'm not sure how accurate it is exactly, but it gives me a good ballpark idea, and it shows me kind of what the max and what the min temperatures were. So I like to keep a track of that. So here is one of the so here's one of the things that's really helpful. It's a heat mat. And so I've run an extension cord from the house to the so I've run an extension cord, I'm sorry, from the house to the greenhouse. I'm all over the place today. Um, but what this does is it provides heat from the bottom of the tray. So there's a little thermostat and a probe for it. So you put the probe down into the tray where the soil is, where the potting mix
Mm-hmm.
is, and it heats when the temperature is below a certain temperature. So during the day, this isn't turning on. But if we have cold nights, some of those nights where it's dropping down into the 30s and 40s, I typically keep it set somewhere around 65 degrees, um, to keep the plants, from not freezing, keep the roots from not freezing at night if we get a sub freezing night. Um, and this is one of the trays that I use. This is one of the
The
what they
air
call
prune trays.
the air prune tray,
Yeah, yeah.
right? So I get some of the benefits of soil blocking with a little less labor. And then this one is with a cover. So on those nights again where it's, near freezing, this provides like a greenhouse inside of a greenhouse.
Mhm.
Uh, if you do this though, it's absolutely critical that that come off during the day, even if it's, 30, 40
Hmm.
outside during the day. If you've got a sunny day, the temperature in this will be even higher than with inside the greenhouse. So that's just the thermostat that
Yep.
runs to the probe. So,
Yeah, so like
yeah,
every morning you're out there lifting off these covers, and
yep,
every night you're back out there putting the back on, and
yep. And I'll
yeah,
find the nights are a little easier. It's those mornings where I'm rushing off to work. There have been a couple times where I've pulled off, got halfway down the street, and was like, "Ooh, I've gotta run back home and
yeah,
make sure that those are off." On these days like this, anything over 50, 55 degrees, it's got to be ventilated. It's got to be uncovered, or you will absolutely roast your plants.
and
And
now
this is more critical, for those the cool season crops. So I'm starting to a lot of the same crops that Peter mentioned, the brassicas, the cold crops. They can handle the cold, but I found if they get too much heat during those early stages, they bolt really quickly.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. I was just about to ask, like, what plants are you starting in this? So you're pretty much the same plants that I was saying, because those are the plants that can withstand the cold that you're gonna put out first anyway. So that's
Right.
yep,
Anything that's cold and frost tolerant, the benefit is it can handle the cold once it germinates, but they also tend to have colder temperatures that they'll germinate in, right? So the lettuces, the bok choys, they don't do well, trying to germinate in soil that's 80 degrees like you would your tomatoes and peppers. So I actually want some of those cooler periods for those to germinate. And spinach is another one. I've had issues in the past where I've accidentally put those on like a heat pad. If I had some tomatoes and peppers in one of the big mats like this and just accidentally left the trays on those, and they will sprout. Your germination rates can be lower, but they'll sprout. But something very interesting that I've seen is as soon as they get the true leaves, they'll go ahead and sprout and they'll go right to flower
yep.
right in this cell. So you got to be extremely careful with that.
And do you use any kind of a heat sink to trap the heat, like the barrels of water or anything? Or do you rely more on this like greenhouse within a greenhouse concept?
I stick with just the greenhouse in the greenhouse. Again, our temperature swings are so wild. And we had to chat with Gardner Scott a few weeks ago. I feel like he's one of the ones that I've actually seen try the water
Mhm.
barrel method inside the greenhouse. And a lot of them in the colder environments are finding that the cold water actually holds on to more cold than they anticipated. And so a lot of them are not using that method anymore. It's just not going the way that they expected.
Mhm. No, that totally makes sense. And
I
I
will
like
say,
the.
I'm
Oh, go
sorry, I
ahead.
will add one thing I was going to say. I do think it's important. So you'll see them on top of that table. It's critical that you keep them raised, so up off the ground, and with something that has adequate airflow, because that warm air circulates. More importantly, at night, it's not the cold air is sinking down. So the lower the plants are to the ground, the more cold air they're going to get and more moisture from the ground because my greenhouse has a just earth floor.
Mhm.
Mm.
Very
I'm a little
cool.
jealous of this greenhouse. I'm thinking, oh, maybe I could do something like that next year because it looks really nice. Uh, the alternate method I was thinking about too is all my beds are 4 foot by 8 foot. So if I somehow create a like hoop house that I can move from one bed to the other, I could have one or two winter beds.
Mhm.
But like we've barely gotten above 30 degrees here for several weeks. So I don't think this winter at least would be, have very much success growing in the winter like you have. So Yeah,
You'll have to
but like,
dig them out first.
yeah, I'd have to take off the foot of snow that's on top of. Yeah.
Yeah,
So I
something
have
like an electrical conduit type frame might help, but that's a lot of labor, for just a home gardener.
Yep.
Mhm.
I've heard of
Sorry.
also other people trying to keep their crops warm in the winter. They'll use those old incandescent Christmas lights to try to get some heat in there. And it also, brightens it up so you can, during the short days, you can go out there and check on them and see what you're doing. So it's got that side benefit. Yep.
I've seen that. It looks really cool.
Mhm.
So the one thing I was going to say about greenhouses and Mylan, I noticed yours is very well secured, but I've had experience several years ago in my home gardening journey where I used to have a mini greenhouse. And I didn't use it for germinating because I found it was still a little bit too cold outside to do a whole lot with the germination. But I used to like it as a nice, kind of preliminary step to hardening off the seedlings so they could, get used to a little bit of sunlight out there, without getting all the temperature extremes. And it also just freed up some space in the indoor growing rack. And I thought I had this thing very well secured. I had some really heavy pots on the bottom to keep it from blowing over. But I went to work one day and we got a really nasty windstorm and it sure enough blew over and all my seedlings blew with it. So that is one caveat. And I would say almost regardless of what winter sowing technique you're using is just make sure it's very well secured from the wind because
Mhm.
believe me, that's a disaster you do not want to. It's just devastating. So whatever you're doing, just keep it safe from the wind. I mean, the wind is, we've had caterpillar tunnels go down with the wind. So it's just one of those elements that you really have to factor in when you're, trying to keep things covered outside.
Yeah, and that wind threat, that's universal. So that's something that I've dealt with. Like you said, I did use guy lines at all four corners. I am drilling down into heavy clay, so I've used some heavier duty tent stakes for that. But in the future, the next time I replace this cover, I'm going to line the bottom with like some sandbags or something like that, because
Mm-hmm.
wind does get underneath. And we've had some of those weeks where it was super cold, where we've had 30, 40 mile per hour winds. And I've kind of looked out there and seen it, dancing and moving. It didn't give, but there were a few times that I did think it might go. So in the meantime, you can kind of see the my storage containers and things like that. I'll just fold the lip of the greenhouse under and then
Mm-hmm.
make sure that just like you mentioned, the heavier pots, anything that's storage material or any shelves that I have inside, I try to make those rest on the excess material to add just a little bit more weight. But it's not a guarantee, and the
Mm-hmm.
wind is more devastating, I think, than the cold because it you know, brings cooler temperatures. It has shearing forces that destroy, young plants and stuff like that. So that's definitely a concern.
For sure. And anything you're using to cover it also can turn into a giant sail,
Yep.
basically. So yeah, word of warning.
Yeah. Anything else before we sign off about winter sowing?
I guess one technique we haven't talked about that we can just touch on quickly is the cold frame. So that's essentially where you have, a bit of a wooden box. It's usually on the ground, and then you have sort of a glass. You can even use an old window, and
Hmm.
that essentially sits on top of the frame, and that's another great way to do winter sowing. I guess the only caveat with that is again, if you're still in a season or a situation where it's going to get covered in snow, you
Yeah.
need to deal with that. But that's kind of a middle ground, as you're getting into spring and things are starting to warm up, but you're still getting some colder nights, putting things in a cold frame can be a great way to, kind of get a little bit of jump start on the season,
Hmm.
but without, the risk of things getting totally frostbitten.
Yeah, yeah. I've actually thought about that before. I had an old window I replaced, and I was uh, going to do that, and then I realized that the frame was all, it had gone too much. So I was like, I don't really want this around the veggies I'm growing. So,
Hmm.
but I,
Paint chips with your lettuce.
yeah, and it's like, is it lead paint? So yeah, I didn't want to worry about that. So
No, that totally makes sense. And again, it might seem counterintuitive that we're talking about the cool season crops here because it's like, well, they can take a frost. What's the big deal? But the problem is when they're tiny little seedlings, they haven't necessarily built up that, strong resistance to the cold as opposed to like a kale plant that's been growing all season and now it's, well below freezing and it looks just fine, right? So that's why even though they're cool season crops, you want to
mhm.
give them that little bit of extra protection so that, they don't get a real cold snap and
Yeah,
bite the
and
dust.
if you start them in milk jugs or any of these methods, they're already more used to the outside temperature, so you don't need to harden them off as much. You can probably do without any hardening off. You can take them straight from the milk jug, put them in the garden, and they should be pretty good. So, yeah. All right, and I think that'll wrap it up for our winter sowing episode here. If you have any questions, please email us at question@planter.garden. Um, and we'll see you on the next episode. All right, bye.